All right, hello everyone, and welcome. It is Thursday, February 11th, so we are about halfway through here at the end of week 2. And let's see, on Tuesday we just took some time to discuss your first submission for the game composition of 2D platformer. And we had a lot of good stuff to check out and listen to. So if you weren't able to catch that session, or if you just want a review of that, the archive is up for you to check out, and it has a full stereo capture, a high-resolution capture of everything, or at least the audio, so that you can get a better idea of how different things might have sounded. And so I have returned back your production technique and technical assignment grade sheets, and I am almost done with your game compositions grade sheets, and I would like to get them done and posted back to you by tonight, so that everything is back in your court for the revisions that are going to be due this Sunday. So before we started into our new material for this session, I wanted to bring up the grade sheets of each one of those and discuss what you have seen so far. Oh, that's right. Adobe does not zoom correctly. The grade sheets that you have already received from the production technique and the technical assignment, and then go over a bit about the game composition grade sheets, which a lot of the stuff we certainly discussed as we went through everybody's projects. All right, so starting out here, the technical assignment grade sheet, most people did just fine on this, or they missed one aspect that kind of waterfalls across all of the different files. The way to read this is you've got different columns here for file name, the file format, the bit depth, sample rate, and number of channels. Most of the time the file name, the file format was correct. Even the bit depth was correct. Every once in a while I saw sample rates incorrectly set for the different files. But most of all, it often comes down to the number of channels for these core audio files. The core audio files are mono, and remember to create a mono file out of Logic, or using Logic. Come on, Logic. You are going to use this B and C E button down here to bounce something rather than the normal file bounce or Command B. By doing that, you can set up this channel to be mono by switching the main stereo output and switching it to mono. It would probably be best to rename that mono output. But once that's there and you hit this B and C E button, you actually don't get a stereo format. You only get mono formats for that core audio file. It's 8-bit, 22K, and mono. So that's typically the main thing that causes trouble in this assignment. Otherwise, it's just some detail that is marked off and is easily fixed for a revision. For the production technique assignment, this was all about looping. So most often, if there's anything wrong, it's over here in the looping column because there was a hiccup, or there's a big change in pitch or volume or instrumentation, or there's a pop or a click or something like that. Beyond that, there is a named column, which is the file appropriately named according to the asset list or the grade sheet. And then there is a delivered column, and most of this is whether or not the file actually exists. It was delivered with the assignment. That's more than likely the case. But it also refers to the fact of whether or not the WAV file contains the correct audio. Every once in a while, there will be a file that has a completely different music track in it, or it has been bounced and it's blank entirely. Or something about that particular bounce and the audio contained is incorrect. So that throws people off every once in a while because they see the delivered column and they're like, I delivered it. It's right there. but always check the content of that file to make sure that it was actually bounced what was supposed to be delivered. All right, so those are those grade sheets, and most of it is finding what was incorrect and then double checking your work and updating it and making the change for the revisions. I also am going to talk about, I have the revisions page here, and in just a moment I'm going to talk about actually delivering everything for the revision, that part of it, of course. So your game composition grade sheets, these will come flooding into your inbox here pretty soon. And we have 3 different sections for intros, main loops, and endings. This top part is all about if the file was delivered correctly, and that there's a screenshot of your DAW session contained with the delivery. So this is going to be a total of 9 files. I typically start with the main loops because it kind of really defines the whole composition. So each one of these are pretty much the same in what they're actually focused on, but there might be some different instances because of the type of cue it is. So we have a formatting row here that is it file exist? Is it named correctly? Is it the correct sample rate, the bit depth, the number of channels, and is it the correct number of bars, either 2 bars or 4 or 8 bars for the main loops? Instrumentation does the music contain all of the appropriate instrument layers, which is drums, bass, harmony, and melody? Do you have at least one layer for each one of those? And the compositions often require a bit more layers even than that to kind of flesh out the overall mix. Most of the time it is a missing melody, or it is just a looping arpeggiator pattern instead of a melody. Every once in a while I'll just have no drums or no bass line or something that provides a pretty big gap in the overall mix. So watch out for making sure that all of the layers exist. Does the file loop properly? This is most of the time it's a gap at the end of the file, and a lot of times the music itself would loop. It is the appropriate 8 bars, but the file that was bounced was longer than that, and that creates a gap at the end, and then there's a pause every single time the file loops around. Or does something get cut off heavily at the end of the file? Does the instrumentation really feel like it stops and resets every single time the loop comes around? That often can come from really sustained thick pads or choirs or organs or some particular instrument that doesn't have a normal, well, I guess not normal, but is too long and sustained, and you hear the attack repeat every single time the file starts over. Composition, this is kind of the widest category overall, and a lot of this is focused on the repetition in melody and kind of avoiding repetitious styles and avoiding melodies that are too similar from the first half to the second half of the cue. You want to make sure that you utilize the entire 8 bars of the cue so that your melody develops and doesn't restate the idea, because 8 bars on its own is going to be short enough that it loops heavily each time, you want to make sure to extend and use the entire cue to develop your idea before it loops within that. So no 2 bars 4 times in an 8-bar cue, or 4 bars twice in an 8-bar cue. And then mix comes down to is it too loud and over compressed and distorted, where everything just kind of peaks and stays there at about 0 or -1. Or is there something really off with the panning, or too much or too little effects processing used? So those different aspects can be, or overall the file is too low in volume, that it's going to have difficulty competing with the other music or the other sound effects in the game. Other than that, the intro cues and the ending cues here have a consistency row that is how consistent is the music and the instrumentation from the intros and endings going in, the intros going into the main loops and the main loops going into the endings. And that often comes down to the instrumentation. Are you using the same instrumentation in the intros and endings as you are in the main loops? And is there any sort of strong rhythmic or melodic or harmonic inconsistency between those cues that would make it really rough as it transitions from one to the next? So those are the things that are generally discussed and pointed out on the grade sheets. And if you have any sort of questions, really all of the grade sheets are meant to be the start of a conversation. If you have any questions or things to discuss, we can certainly go over any part of the grade sheets individually and talk about whatever you need, or send me questions on email and I'll reply to those. All right, so that is what you will be receiving for all of your assignments. And then by Sunday, you have the optional revision assignment. So I guess the first thing to point out is that it is completely optional, but very, very highly encouraged to update and create better versions of all of your assignments. The folks that do well in this class take advantage of the revision opportunity to make sure that they get the best composition as a whole. Now, if you, for the technical assignment and the production technique, if you got 100 and there's nothing to change, then there's no need to do a revision on it. Or if you are perfectly happy with your grade, then there's no need to do revision. With the game compositions, there's always, or often things to better and improve in all of the compositions. So it is really about getting the best work completed for a demo project for these compositions. So once you have completed any of the changes or all of the changes from the assignment, you are going to submit it back as a zipped file back to this assignment. So what I ask, number one, is that you resubmit all of the files to make a complete assignment again. That way, if you only needed to change your 3 main loops, you didn't need to change anything in your intros and endings, please submit all of the WAV files again with a new screenshot of any changes that you made in your session, and then put that in a folder. And then all of your submissions, all of your assignments that you are going to revise, each have their own folder containing a complete version of the assignment. That way I don't screw anything up on my end, because I have an old version and a new version, and which versions did I actually need to work with. And if you just submit to me in the revision assignment the complete assignment all over again, that's the only one I will look at for the revision and take that into account. So new files, new screenshots, put it in a folder, put each one of the assignments in their own folder, put that in one global revision folder, and then zip it up and submit it to me. The other thing to point out is do not change any of the names of the original files, especially the WAV files. The WAV files are meant to be named exactly as they were from the original assignment. Every once in a while I'll get music ending _01 version 2 or revision or somebody's initials or something that indicates that those are the new versions. And do not change any of the original assets, but add _revisions to the overall folder name. You can change the folder names or modify them with the revisions information there, but do not change any of the original files, because those are set up on purpose for the game. All right, so that should get you going with the revisions. Grade sheets. If you have any questions, let me know. And submit everything by Sunday. And uh, question here: what if we just replaced the files? Replaced which files for which assignment? If you are, whenever you resubmit everything, I need the entire copy all over again. If we just replace the files in Logic when we saved a new one. Oh, you mean for a screenshot? It asked if we'd like to replace. Is this for which assignment? This is for the game composition, so that you are updating and changing. So you are importing a file and switching that one out. Oh, if you're naming it with the same name, it will give us the choice to replace. Okay. I would not go into the same exact session. Probably the best thing to do is save another version of your session or make an entire copy of it and call it the session version 2 or for revisions. Or when you're bouncing files out, bounce them to a separate folder so that you don't overwrite your original ones. Keep those as a copy and always create new sessions and new folders as you are moving forward. If you constantly go back to the same session, you'll, maybe not in this assignment, but in some project that you're working on, you'll lose some work and you can't go back, and or you want to take some idea that you've already deleted and you want to bring it back into a session. It's always best to create new sessions as you go forward and bounce out into new folders. That way you don't ever have to replace anything. Cool. All right. All right. Revisions, submissions. That should take care of everything we are, where we are up to in this week. Take us through to the end of the week. And we already, of course, talked about the week 2 assignments from last session. So we will get into the new material. Let me just take a quick pause here before we get into this stuff. Okay. So our topic here in the second week is really about how do you start a new project? How do you kind of go from that blank slate or blank canvas? You're hired onto a new project, and you got to start out from somewhere and determine all of the as much of the project and all of the aspects of it as you can to really get a solid place to start from and a plan to move forward. So when you are working out in the industry, especially in the earlier stages of your career, you are trying to find clients and going back and forth and networking with people and trying to provide your services when they have a new project on hand. And you work quite a bit talking back and forth and submitting some demo work and getting them a sense of giving them the sense that you are the correct person to work on the project. And so you try really hard to get your first couple of credits and the first couple of games under your belt, and then somebody calls you or emails you and says, okay, well, we've taken a look at your work and we think that you're the right person to provide the music for our project. you're hired, and you either you should probably try to get a strong sense that you are the person that they want for the project before you really start nailing down money, because you have to get a sense of what the project's all about. And it's kind of that poker game of nobody wants to show their cards when you're talking money. They'll always ask, okay, what's your rate? Or how much do you charge for composition on a game? And it's like, well, that can sometimes depend on the budget that's involved in the project. I can probably make anything work depending on the amount of money that you have. It just would scale up and down as to how much services we can provide and how much music we can provide. And trying to you get hired, you negotiate the rate and the cost and how much work you're going to accomplish for how much money. And they give you, you start gathering tools and materials to get started on the project. And so, what are some of the things that are, what are some of the tools that are very helpful that can be provided by the game team so that you can get started and create the best work as possible, and get not kind of go down the wrong path, but kind of really nail down the overall feel of the soundtrack as early on as you can, so you can generate lots of different content for different parts of the game. So one aspect is if there's any sort of text description or scripts or storyboards. A lot of games have cut scenes or different scenes that are storyboarded out, where the designers will draw out all of the different either levels that they might be in, or different action scenes that might happen, or different big parts of the story that are going to be key in the overall storyline of the game. If there's scripts, if there's dialogue, if there's any sort of description of what is happening in the game and when it is happening in the game. Some of this stuff doesn't come right away, but can be built up over time. So you can get, there are different aspects of a game. Some of it is in a linear movie, like a cutscene. A lot of games have movies that are played at the beginning or end of every single level, that kind of introduces you to the story and says what you're about to do, and then is kind of a reward at the end when you finish a particular objective or action in the game. And so if you can figure out how many levels your game has, and how many different cutscenes, or what is the general overview of the storyline, you can start nailing down different places for the music and how it's going to work. A design document. You can kind of relate a design document in a very generic way to maybe a business plan for a startup company. If you have this wonderful idea for a business, and you need money or you need investors into your business, then you create a business plan that is all of the details of how you are going to successfully run your business, and how you are going to make money off your business and repay back all of loans and investments. So a business plan says, okay, this is the product that I'm going to sell, or this is going to be the service that I provide, and this is my location, and this is how much my monthly costs are going to be, and employees and running the business, and this is how much money we project to make, and this is how much money you're going to make off of your investment in this business. And basically, it is as much as can be well defined, all aspects of the money going in, the business running itself, and the money coming back out. And so a design document, in a very generically similar way, a very loosely similar way, is if a game developer has a wonderful idea for a game project, then they would go to a game publisher or some investor to get money in to invest into their game so that they can hire teams and build the game and return and in return make hopefully a good return of income off of it. So a design document is every aspect of what the game's all about. What type of game is it? Is it a puzzle game? Is it an action game? Is it an adventure game? Is it a kids game? What devices is it going to be on? Is it going to be a PlayStation or an Xbox or a Nintendo game? Or is it going to be an iOS or Android mobile game? All of the technology that's involved in creating the game, and then every aspect of the game itself. What is the objectives? What's the story? Who are the characters? Who are the heroes? Who are the bad guys? What are the ups and downs? And how is it going to be set out in different levels? Or is it going to be one massive world? Or how do you progress through the game? What's the point? What's the objectives? Basically everything that can be defined about this game. And different game companies are better at this than others of having sort of an overall design that drives the production forward. And at some point, there hopefully is a section that says music and sound. And so you are hired on to the project and they send you this PDF or they send you off to a website that is loaded with information about the game project. And you go to the part that defines music and sound, and maybe it says to be determined by the music composer. And you're like, well, that doesn't help very much because I'm the music composer. And either that's good or bad, right? That could be, well, you have complete creative freedom because you get to have all of the ideas and you can take it and maybe have more control in the direction that it goes with the music. Or that also means that you have to have all the ideas and you have to interpret their intentions for the music, and you might have to go back and forth and throw a lot of things at them to really determine what they actually mean when they say they want music in their game. So there is hopefully some well-defined source of information that describes as much as possible about the game so that you get a sense of what they need from the music and sound. And this really is necessary not just for audio, but for every aspect of the game. If you have a game team that is 5 or 10 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 people, and they're all working together to create this game project, they all have to literally be on the same page of what the overall game is going to be, so that they all don't have and go off in their own unique direction. They have an overall guiding force. And I mean, that comes in lots of different ways beyond the design document, but it really gives a starting point for everybody to get introduced to what the game is all about. An asset list. An asset list is a list of all of the files that are needed for the game and their technical specifications. At its base idea, it's typically like an Excel document, a spreadsheet that has information on what the file is going to be named, and what sample rate, what bit depth, how many channels. Each one of our game projects, all of our assignments, have an asset list that you follow so that you deliver the files in the exact specified way that works with the game. And an asset list is useful beyond that because it's often how you get paid in a project, meaning that it is an agreed upon document that says, I will deliver these 100 sounds or 100 minutes of music or whatever it's going to be, and you are going to pay me X amount of money. There's often a problem in games that games can grow and shrink and change in all sorts of different ways, and sounds and music that they thought they would need initially may not be necessary in the final project. And well, that's okay. If we agreed on these 100 sounds that I will provide, then and you only use 95 of them, that's fine. You still pay me for the 100 sounds, And if you need more than 100 sounds, then that's also fine. We'll just continue at the same rate, and I'll keep providing more audio. So sometimes you, as the game composer, have to define this, where you'd say, hey, we're doing a game called 2D Platformer, and I think it would be a great idea to have multiple variations for an intro and main loops and endings. And I'm going to start out by creating 9 files, 3 variations for each one of those categories. And then we'll go from there. We'll check it out. We'll go back and forth to get a sense of what the best composition will work for this game. And then if you decide you want more variations, or you don't end up using all 3 of them, we'll start there with those 9 files. And it gives you a agreed upon list, so that you can always go back to this and say, okay, this is where we started, this is what we agreed upon, and so we will all fulfill our ends of the deal. Concept art. Quite necessary to get a sense of what you are designing for. What you are designing for the music and sounds, and to give a visual representation of the music created. Sometimes this exists in less form, or not as much as in other projects. Depending on where you are hired in the game project, might mean there's not really much of a game at all. When working on a game, it's very important to understand that you're really working on a broken game for 6 months to a year, or multiple years, however long the game is in production for. And because the game doesn't exist, or the game is fabulously crashing all over the place, or only part of the game exists, and you are using references of art, 2D art, animations. Maybe eventually there'll be a working version of the game that you can check out. Sometimes it starts like in just text in an email, or on the back of a napkin. They draw something out and they say, okay, we're going to do an ogre game, and that ogre is going to steal the princess from the local town, the local kingdom, and we need kingdom music and ogre music. And you're like, okay, I don't know what ogre music is, but I'll go figure that out, and send you stuff back. And so your music will influence the art, and the art, they send back more and more art, and that influences your music, and it goes around and around, and kind of gets closer and closer to the final project. And eventually that turns into a working game, or a build of the game. And our projects each week are a really good example of this, where it is not a full game. It is what's often known as a vertical slice, which is one completely working part of the game while everything else is not working. Often you would be contacted to say, hey, we've got to show stuff off to Microsoft and Sony so that we can get this game on the Xbox and PlayStation. Or we're going to the Game Developers Conference this year, and we're going to have a booth, and we need to show something off with a really awesome trailer and some gameplay. So here's one level of the game of Angry Bots. Go make it as awesome as possible so that we have something to show off, and we'll ignore the fact currently that all of the other levels do not work and they don't exist. And often when you see game trailers really, really early on in the process, it's just from one part of the game that's already more completed than the rest. And this allows them to build media and attention while the rest of the game is being built overall. So you might be called in to do some trailers and some parts of the game to really show it off and give it some polish before it's released out to the public. So it is important to understand that our games are already finished and completed. You really don't get the luxury of working on a fully working game while you're working on it, and you either get it in pieces and parts, or you get stuff that is half working, and you have to kind of make it work against the audio that you are trying to provide. So this can be testy at times as the game gets further and further fleshed out. Research. There's always a research stage. Often when you're first hired on to a project, clients really talk in the language of other projects. Game designers will talk about previous games. Film directors will talk about previous films, and so having a language of the industry and the classics and maybe the not so classics of games and of the game industry are always a good tool to have. And that means if you are in the music industry, you should be listening to tons of music and figuring out how they got particular sounds and how the composers or the songwriters created their hits. What's popular? Why is it popular? What's good? Why is it good? Because good and popular doesn't always mean the same thing. Films. If you want to be a film composer, you should be watching tons of movies, listening to ton of film soundtracks, paying attention to the composers and the directors and the production studios and how they did it, watching behind the scenes. And with games, that just means you should be playing tons of games and keeping up with the game industry. What's popular? What's really great in sound and music in these games? Whether it's just the gameplay, like wow, there was a really cool action game where you had a sword, and the way I could use the sword in the game really felt lifelike. Or there was a puzzle game that I played on my iOS device that had a really good mechanic where I had to shake the phone around to do something, or just something unique and innovative, or how they did the music, or what they did with the sound on this was keeping up with all of what's going on in the industry is always extremely important. Story research. So they're making an ogre game, or they're making a game about zombies, or they're making hey, we're going to make a game called Assassin's Creed that's based in the Italian Renaissance, and you're going to have this friend in the game called Leonardo da Vinci, and you're like, oh, well, I should probably go read up on the Italian Renaissance and understand what was happening there then musically, and what was possible, and what direction we could go with the music. That includes music research also. Style, genre, instrumentation, time period, location, culture, all of those things influences your soundtrack. And again, having a language of all of that and understanding what the heck your client means when they talk about some obscure project or some obscure sound will help you be able to kind of push the soundtrack further. Sound palette. Discovering the sound palette for the game and for the soundtrack of the game is extremely important, and is often a lot of trial and error in the beginning of the process. What can often happen in a game, depending on their budget and the size of the game, but what can happen is that they'll hire you early on and say, okay, we've thought about the music soundtrack and you have the best sound appropriate for this game, and so we're going to hire you. Why don't you go create an hour's worth of music that is in the style of this game? And it doesn't have to be interactive or looping or make sense for any part of the game, but do something that's action, and do something that's exploration, and do something that is puzzle solving or stealth or winning or losing, or just fundamental game aspects of a game. And then in this process, they'll say, okay, we don't even have a game yet, but go create a soundtrack of what this game might be, and we can start defining what the sound is going to be, what the instrumentation is going to be, what the style of the music is going to be. And that includes maybe acquiring certain instruments, or networking with certain artists or players of those instruments. Excuse me. Maybe it is getting a new piece of gear or technology or sample library that's going to really be fundamental to the soundtrack, some tools that you need to get the job done. Whether or not that is incorporated into the budget, a lot of times it is a good idea to account for a particular percentage that's going to be the getting instruments and the tools together to complete this. So, figuring out if it's all going to be in the box. Is it all going to be synths and sample libraries, or is it going to be a hybrid of live musicians and your DAW, or is it going to be a complete live session where you need recording studios or an orchestra or performers, players, session musicians, whatever it is. So all of those things have to be determined and figured out, and they might kind of be realized at different stages of the process. All right, so next here, we're going to talk about different types of games, different game genres, and the musical stylings of those. So if you were hired on for a particular game project, you get a sense of what type of music it might be, just in a very general sense. So if they say we have a puzzle game, or we have a racing game, or a shooter game, or a flying game, or a platform game, or any adventure game, or all sorts of different styles and approaches, you may get a very generic sense of what might be needed for that music. And of course, just like music, games, there's all sorts of games that break genres, that don't fit into genres, that blur the lines back and forth. And we're not going to be really talking about it in that direction. We're going to make it as generic as possible so that we can fit a whole bunch of stuff into a particular genre and kind of discuss it from a big top aerial view of how these things work together. All right, let me take another quick pause here before we get started. All right. So, our first genre here is arcade games. There used to be, way back, large rooms with these very loud machines that would have these screens with all sorts of colorful graphics on them, and they would eat your quarters, and they were called arcades. And there would be arcades in your local mall or your movie theater or pizza shop or something like that. You can get access to arcade games and pinball games, and the purpose of these games were to be loud and obnoxious and attract your attention. And they're typically shorter game experiences that were really there to have you lose 3 lives and have to throw another quarter into the machine to various degrees of success. And so, because of limited technology and because of limited technology, the amount of sound and music that was available was quite short, and so they had to use it in creative ways. And you basically heard the same thing over and over again. Every time you threw in the quarter, you started at level 1, you began, you played through, you heard very similar sounds, and they kind of repeat it over and over again and kind of get etched into your brain or the public conscience. And they were often based off of levels, so they would just be looping pieces of music playing behind the level, or just sound effects. And Not long after that, things like the Atari comes around, and the Nintendo Entertainment System comes around, and home gaming consoles become popular, and it sort of signals the end of arcades in their, at least in their glory days, because now instead of putting hundreds of quarters into the machine, you could now take $300 worth of quarters and give it to them one time, and then take home an arcade machine and play it all you wanted at home. And so games really kind of mimicked the arcade style. A lot of games are known as platformer games, where just like 2D platformer, the main... oh, did I freeze up? Did I lose you? Hello? Am I still there? Okay. We'll keep going here. Platformer games, the real purpose was running and jumping and shooting or punching, and they kind of transitioned into home arcades or home gaming systems, and those have, of course, become very popular, and the bread and butter of the video game industry, and very technically advanced. And then there's kind of been a resurgence recently of arcade games, because now there are mobile devices. And through a combination of the internet, digital distribution, smartphones, and tablets, people have new ways of playing games. And those games are on kind of limited systems. Smaller screen, less overall space, hard drive space, and RAM. So they can often mimic games and take a lot of the same style and approaches of these early arcade games. Arcade games are great ways of getting involved in the game industry. They are often created by smaller independent developers, smaller teams that are also trying to get noticed in the industry. And the scope of these games are not necessarily massive and huge and require endless amounts of music and sound. They're often based off of levels, again, so that they are loop-based. You start at level 1, you hear level 1 music, there's menu music, and they kind of go back and forth. And so you've got things like Angry Birds and Plants vs. Zombies. All the Villes used to be really popular on, I don't know if Facebook games are as popular anymore. Cityville, Farmville. But all of these take and find brand new success in a new format. Think about the composer for Angry Birds. Angry Birds, I believe, is still the number one entertainment product in referenced to return on investment. Meaning that it's made the most money of any book or movie or television show or other game, when the amount of money that they put into it and the amount of money that they've gotten out of Angry Birds. Rovio was about to collapse as a company. They made, I think, like 30 or 40 games that were horrible failures. And right around the time that mobile devices become popular, they release a really fun game, Angry Birds, and it absolutely blows up. And they've made over $1 billion on the property, not just from dollar game downloads, but marketing and licensing, and not so much anymore, but it was there for a while that you couldn't turn around and see some kid with an Angry Birds t-shirt, or they're actually making an Angry Birds movie that's coming out with Jason Sudeikis as the red bird in Angry Birds. So very big just changes and shifts in the industry. And so but the person doing all the composition was really not all that popular, and then makes the theme song for Angry Birds, and it becomes just so well known because you hear it over and over and over again every single time you play the game, and now it's being performed by orchestras and all sorts of different stuff. Here in the chat, wasn't there supposed to be a Halo movie? Yeah, there was supposed to be a Halo movie, and then they scratched it from Weta down in New Zealand. But there's going to be an Assassin's Creed movie. Michael Fassbender is Desmond in from Assassin's Creed. Magneto is going to be in Assassin's Creed. And then I just saw that I can't believe this, but hey, who knows? Sony said that there's going to be a Sonic the Hedgehog movie by 2018. I saw that the other day, and I thought that was very odd. But in general, I'm for video game movies, no matter how ridiculous they are, just because it has more exposure in the industry and it just helps everything overall. But it's pretty interesting. So these types of games are a great way of getting started in the industry. They're often looking for new talent and are smaller in scope and size. And so on the exact opposite end of the spectrum would be things like action games, which are not necessarily the best place to get started in the industry. They are often looking for big name, well-known talent that has experience in making soundtracks for large games or movies, where there's hundreds of millions of dollars invested into these projects, and they're going to make maybe $1 billion back on it. It used to be, well, not so much anymore, but Call of Duty there for a while, every single time they released one of those, they were making $1 billion off of each game. Which is absolutely insane. Grand Theft Auto did it. They made $1 billion, but now nothing can touch Star Wars, making $2 billion, which is also insane. But so these are massively large in the size and scope of their soundtracks. These days, what's popular is what's typically known as a first-person shooter, where you are actually looking through the eyes of the main character, and they come in often in two different flavors of single-player and multiplayer games. Multiplayer is humans versus humans, and multiplayer where you are playing against somebody over the internet. And multiplayer games have a very different approach to the music and the sound effect. Well, not the sound effects so much, but the music especially, than single-player games. Single-player games are often story-driven games. You are the hero of the story, and you are progressing through different parts of that story, and you can... the action games, while they seem big and complex, and they are, they can often be very linear in their playthrough or gameplay. Meaning that you start at the beginning of the story and you fight your way through a certain section, and enemies pop out and you take them out one by one, and then you take the last one out, and the music shifts and changes into action music, and you take the last bad guy out, and then it shifts back to ambient. You keep progressing through the game, and you reach a big bad guy at the end, and you defeat them, and you go off to the next level or the next part of the story. And you it's almost like a rat in a maze, where you are going through a very specific linear storyline. And since it is so linear, and basically you start at point A and you got to work your way to point B, and then once you go to point B, this happens and this part of the story is revealed, and then you get to point C, and then you have a better idea of the music and what's going to happen in the creation of, or the rollout of the music soundtrack. With a multiplayer game, that becomes a lot more difficult because you have no idea what's going to happen in a multiplayer game. You might be wandering around and it's just footsteps and breathing, and you don't hear all that much. And then you turn the corner and you go into a room, and there's 15 people with rocket launchers, and they all light them off at the same time, and it's the loudest sound that you'll ever hear in the game. And how do you account for the mix? And a lot of times music is very difficult because If I'm playing against somebody online and they defeat me, then I need to hear one piece of music and they need to hear another piece of music. I lost and they won. And so they have multiple mixes. The game and all of the computers basically have to create, there's your mix that you hear in the game, and then 32 other real-time stereo or surround mixes of music and sound effects for everybody else that's playing that game instantly all across the world. So the amount of technology that goes into making all of that stuff happen is very impressive, and it just is kind of a different beast entirely, working on a multiplayer game versus a single player game. But overall, these games are have lots of money invested and lots of money returned on it, and if they fail, they fail majestically, and they have big name talent, typically from the Hollywood type of scene overall. Here in the chat, how much money do you think one of the composers on a $1 or $2 billion game makes? Not nearly as much. They probably make not that much different than somebody that works and it only makes $100 million, right? Because unless there is something accounting for like bonuses and sales goals, which if you do a Call of Duty game, the company knows that they're going to make tons of money off of it, and they may not want to, just because they made $2 billion off of it or $1 billion off of it and somebody else made $300 million off of it, they don't necessarily want to share all the same way, but it's can be often based off of sales goals, bonuses at certain points of either revenue or actual sales numbers. But I can tell you probably that it doesn't matter that it makes $500 million or $1 billion to the composer, because the composer gets a negotiated rate and probably does not make much points or percentage off of the whole thing. It's very much a buyout. And now, going on a Call of Duty project, that it is going to be massively successful, and they probably have deeper pockets. But the fact that it hits those astronomical numbers probably doesn't influence the composer in the way you might hope. Like, they don't FedEx bags of money to make up for those massive sales overall, unfortunately. And there is something to be said that if you can negotiate those types of things, more in earlier projects and indie projects, there can be a sense of shared risk and shared reward that can make up for it. Somebody like Activision or Electronic Arts or Rockstar, they know they're going to make money off of it. They have tons of money. They'll pay you what they agree upon, and they're out, and they're going to go off and make the rest of their millions of dollars. But a smaller independent developer, maybe you think that they could be successful, and you request less money on the front end, but you request a percentage or a couple of points on the back end, or bigger bonuses or something that shares in the success of the game. Then that can show the developer that you are in it and you want to make it as best as possible. All right, that says there can be something that is, hey, I'm going to pay you X amount of money, and I'm just going to get my money anyway, and I don't care if you succeed or fail in the game. Of course, that's not really the attitude you want to have overall, but they can be thought of that if I just get a flat rate, then I'm going to get my rate if you're successful or not. But if you share in the success of the game, then it can be thought that you're going to work even harder and you're going to want to make it as best as possible so that you can reap the rewards. So it all depends on the what works in the negotiation and what works for you in the project. Here in the chat, Carmen So if you can get in on the ground floor, you have a better chance of negotiation. Typically, the smaller companies have less money up front. That leaves more opportunity for negotiation because they don't have the money to pay you what you're actually worth or what the going rate would be. But if it's a bigger company, they more often have the money up front and they'll just buy you straight out. And you can request basic bonuses or rewards off of different aspects of sales, but there's typically just a flat rate overall. All right, so kind of in line with the action games on size and scale would be adventure games. These can often even feel much, much bigger. Games like Skyrim or Elder Scrolls Online, you can get lost in for months on end. Grand Theft Auto also, I don't think I've ever finished a Grand Theft Auto because they just are so big and so fun. People don't really play Grand Theft Auto to do the story, or they get bored with the story and they just go wreak havoc all the way through the game and see how much fun they can have. People get lost for years in World of Warcraft. It all starts kind of has its history or lineage, at least in games in like Legend of Zelda or even back to like Dungeons and Dragons. This often is kind of fantasy games, but even more general would be open world games where it's not linear stories where you go from point A to point B or point C, where you are dropped in the middle of a world or the middle of a large story where you can go off in any sort of direction and choose to go through the story in multiple different ways. So Rockstar is really good at this. Anybody played Red Dead Redemption? It's kind of an old Western open world kind of game. It was very well done, the great soundtrack. All the Elder Scrolls series is really good at all of this. Right now it's The Witcher is really popular. There's Dragon's Age, all of the Dark Souls kind of games. They often have their world in some far off fantasy land, but they are more difficult for a composer because they are not, like I said, a linear storyline where you go from the first place to the next place, and you can kind of lay out the soundtrack in a linear form. If you put the character in the middle of the story and they can go, often it starts in the middle of a town and you walk around and you talk to everybody and you get quests or goals and you then go off on adventures. And if you don't know where they're going to go or when they're going to arrive, they have 100 different choices to explore in the world and they all need music and sound. How do you know how anything is going to work? Or like, you know what's possible because you created these 100 locations in the game world, but you don't know in what order they're going to go through them or how they're going to progress. So you don't know what, you know what, but you don't know when anything is going to happen. And so these games are very heavily based off of the where, the location, games and sound, the gameplay and the sound and the music is often triggered by the location that you're in. You entered the dangerous cave, or you went across the snow-capped mountains, or you entered that town, or you. Often it can also be attached to proximity. Location is kind of similar, or proximity is kind of similar to location. How close or far away are you from something? If you're close to danger, or if you are close to a band of enemies that are coming to attack, then the music might shift, even though if that wasn't the case anywhere else, you wouldn't hear that piece of music. So adventure games can also be a challenge in their approach to the music and the score. Lots of options, lots of possibilities. These games just, like I said, they feel like 100 hours or more of content. It doesn't mean that there's 100 hours of music in the game, but they're very good at reusing sounds and music for different parts and in different ways. If you maybe put everything out in stems, then it can be rearranged. There's a great video, I think it's on for this week, about Red Dead Redemption and the music behind it, and they told all of their performers, the music is kind of very much like a spaghetti western or Morricone kind of soundtrack, where they had these great classic Hollywood artists that would play the harmonica or the jaw harp or the banjo or the trumpet or just certain musical aspects of the soundtrack. And they had everything created and built in A minor at 130 BPM. And so if pretty much the entire soundtrack is like that, then you can rearrange and recombine all sorts of different instruments and they would all fit together because they follow the same specification. And you can go at 130 BPM. That's sort of a faster pace where maybe you're on a horse and you're galloping along. You hear a rhythm at that certain pace. Or you can go down to 65, which is more of a cowboy kind of saunter through the game world. And you could really do lots of things with shifting from A minor to the relative C major, or going to like switching double time or half time to kind of get variations of all of that stuff while using similar material. These games can sometimes be defined as hardcore games because they take a lot of skill and time to work through. Action games can often be hardcore, really time consuming, and that really just compares to what are often known as casual games, which can be puzzle games or maybe kids games or internet games, something where it takes just a few minutes to get involved, get in and out of the game, and have fun. So it's just on the size and scale of what is required from the game and from the music. Sports games. Sports games are another entity entirely, in that they are often trying to mimic the real world experience that you hear in the game. Excuse me. Whether it is what you would hear on the field or in the arena, pumping through the speakers while the game is being played. And so sports games have very little composed music just for the game. It's often licensed soundtracks or licensed music from popular artists of the time, and the game developers determine they want a particular style for the game, and they'll go off and hunt out all the different artists that fit the bill. So often it's one of those things of don't call us, we'll call you, because a game, and this goes with all game companies, a lot of them, well, not all of them, but a lot of game companies will not listen to unsolicited demos. They'll throw them straight in the trash for fear of any sort of legal issues. Where if they listened to your demo tape and then 3 months later just happened to write something that could be maybe remotely similar to what they heard, then they are liable for some litigation, right? They might have some legal troubles if somebody comes after them and says, hey, that piece of music that was the theme song for the new FIFA game kind of sounds like something that I submitted, and you stole my work, when they didn't even do that. So that means that it has happened before, and they don't really go down that path again. Sports games are cyclical, meaning that they happen every year. They happen with the sports season. And so they're really good at what they do because they do it all the time. And it's the same, pretty much 80% of the same thing each year with some new stuff added on. So let's see, Madden, we're working currently on some Madden dialogue, editing for the new Madden 17. And they send us 3 hour long, or the session a day is 6 hours, so they'll send us 2 3 hour sessions. That's just one long WAV file. and an Excel document that says all of the files that need to be edited and the lines that are spoken. And then we go through and edit, top and tail it, name it, double check it, quality control, make sure there's nothing wrong with the file, and bounce it out according to their specs and deliver it back to them. And they know exactly what they want. They do it every single year, and they come with the contract and they pay nicely and they want it back immediately, and so you get paid quickly. It's not the most glamorous work out there, but it is very steady and very professional, right? They've, like all the other ones I said, they got deep pockets and they'll know what they'll pay for it, and they are very good at what they do. Unlike some other maybe more independent developers that they're just trying to figure it out also, and so they might have things less defined overall. We had a student that worked on one of the UFC games from EA. He was doing dubstep before everybody in the world was doing dubstep. I mean, there was a lot of music in dubstep, but it wasn't in every single movie and trailer and commercial all over the place that like it was for a couple of years there. And he was on the top of charts like Beatport and SoundCloud, and was pretty well known in his part of the genre. And he was going through Full Sail at the time, and the EA Sports kind of realized that he was local and that he was doing exactly what they wanted for their new UFC game, and so he did some of the character intros when they walk out and that kind of thing. He was just already doing it and doing exactly what they wanted, and they found him and provided some work for him. So it's an interesting way. It's if you are an artist or you are a manager and you want to get exposure for your artists, getting their music into a game is a great way to go, because a lot of these games kind of do it like music videos or just like radio stations, where they throw up the name of the artist and what album it's on and what the record label is, and get a lot of exposure for those players. Here in the chat, Edward, the SSX sound design that was part of one of the videos from last week, including Rumor, was really intriguing. Yes, what they do, they don't get a lot of opportunity to do stuff like that. Sound design and music, well, sound design is a little bit boring in sports games when you maybe compare it to a zombie shooter game or Space Aliens or something like that. The need for speeds and the racing games are a lot of fun, because then you get really cool cars and crashes and stuff like that. But for football and basketball and soccer, it's a lot of Foley, basically. But in SSX, what they can do with that and the music, and having it tweak out the music in real time with filters and delays and distortions and just a whole bunch of effects, they did a lot of cool stuff, and having it manipulate in real time and really remix the music through the gameplay. So it came out to be different each time. All right, the next topic here is locations for game music. Different places that music exists, and different, it's kind of, sort of like a checklist of when you get a game and you're kind of looking over the overall timeline of the game, trying to figure out how much music you might need and where it might go in the game. So a lot of games have cinematics and cutscenes. We already mentioned these. These are the little movies that play at the beginning and the end of a level that are often provide a real bit of reward and more of the story as they progress. So if you know that your game has 12 levels in it, and each level they have a 90-second long cutscene, well, then you can start figuring out, at least for that part, well, I need that many minutes of music in this particular approach. So it's a good way of maybe determining. And they are really comfortable for a music composer, because they're just like composing to a film or a linear piece of media. They don't loop, they're not interactive, They just play back exactly what's happening on the screen. Along the lines of cutscenes, cinematics are intros and endings. The intros turn out to be mini movies or commercials or demos for the game, showing off really amazing graphics and make people want to be involved and play the game. And then games are notorious for not leaving enough in the ending to be the grand payoff for playing all the way through the game. They know 100% of people are going to make it through the beginning of the game. They don't only know that 20 or 30% of the people are going to make it all the way to the end of the game. So maybe some games are less known for or infamous for their poor endings overall. Of course, Mario kind of did this with your quest is over. Thank you, Mario. Quest is over. We present you with a new quest. Oh, okay. I just spent a whole bunch of time trying to save the princess, and then it just starts me over again. Okay. So it's another place for music, another thing that needs to be determined when figuring out how much of the music you're going to build into the soundtrack. Then you have in-game music. This is really one of the more difficult aspects for the composer because this is when the player takes over. And once you give a controller to a human, all bets are off and you have less of an idea of what's about to happen, right? If it's a linear movie, then you always know. You rewind back, it's always going to be the same. But in a game, you have no idea how fast or slow somebody's going to take to get through a particular part. They might blast so quickly through the game that they miss whole parts. They don't even hear parts of the soundtrack, or they go so slow that it ends up repeating over and over and over again. And it gets annoying. So one of the most common things, we've already talked about this, is ambient inaction. A lot of games have a large period of time that's just exploration, just trying to find the next part of the game. And then you turn the corner and you find the next area you're supposed to be in, or the enemies pop out and go, oh, okay, I guess I need to keep going in this direction. So switching back and forth between ambient inaction or bringing the music down or the overall intensity of the soundtrack down and then raising it back up and kind of going up and down over the course of the game becomes more of the challenge. While the music is being played, the game really isn't doing all of that much because the music has already been composed and the work was done by the music composer earlier before the game is being played. But the real work is done when the real decisions are being made in how do you transition from one piece of music to the next. That becomes where more of the challenge occurs in a game. Some games have something called a board switch, which is if the game is about, or if the music is about to get annoying or get boring, then we're just going to fade it out to nothing. Nintendo games were really good at this. If the music plays for too long and is going to just repeat again, like you have a 3-minute long piece of music and they're wandering around for long periods of time and it's gone around 3 times and it's about to hit the 4th, then maybe we don't want it to play again. We just want it to fade out to silence and you just hear sound effects. And then when they stumble across the next part of the game, it'll come roaring back in. Probably second to the gameplay itself is the menu or UI, or second in the amount of time that the player is going to spend there, right? If you're not playing the game, you're probably in some menu somewhere. Whether that is the main menu when you first start the game, you choose your level, you choose your character. Maybe it's a pause menu where you are choosing your weapons or your armor, or you're reading a map or reading the journal or setting your options or settings. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the menu. And the menu is one of the last things to be built. They're like, oh, well, we have to figure out a way to get out of this game, so let's create some menu to quit. And a menu is a really good place for somebody who is starting out. Maybe a junior level designer or composer could work on parts of the menu, because there's a lot of grunt work in it. There's a lot of options. There's a lot going on, and it's not really exciting. You're not probably going to win any sort of award on your awesome UI sounds. But there can be a lot of cool stuff with it, and a lot of games will they're meant, the menu is a very different soundscape than the action in the game. So you hit the pause menu, and it often pauses the action outside in the game itself, and it allows you to relax a little bit, choose some options, figure out what you're about to do, and then unpause it, and everything kind of filters and comes back in. The volume fades up, and you've got the new sound. So a lot of stuff going on in the menu. It can be either strictly sound effects, or it can be a combination of musical sound design to create what you end up hearing. Game trailers. It's important to know that game trailers are often not done by the music composer, just like film trailers. There are trailer houses that specialize in just making trailers for advertising. And so maybe they do use one of the tracks from the game, but a lot of times it comes from library music. And it is just another aspect of your contract to negotiate how they're going to use your music outside of the game. If it is a complete buyout, then they have all rights to it, and they can use it in all forms and fashions. And that's a lot of times why the game company would rather invest more heavily in buying out the music than licensing it, because they need it in all sorts of forms. They need it for the game, for any of the trailers. They'll put it in commercials. They will need it for the sequels to the game, or any downloadable content, or any international releases of the game. Is it going to be on PlayStation and Xbox and Nintendo and iOS devices, mobile devices, websites? It can end up in lots of different places, and those can be negotiated, each one of them, and licensed in different ways. So it's an aspect of the contract that you need to pay attention to make sure, okay, well, you can't pay me this amount of money up front on this. Well, then I retain rights for the soundtrack. And if you're going to create the soundtrack separately, then I'll make my points or money off of the soundtrack, and you don't have to pay me as much upfront. It could be negotiated that way if they have less of a budget to provide for the original soundtrack, or for the original music. All right, just different aspects to think about, different locations for your music, how your music is going to be used in a game project and over the course of the game. The next one here, well, the previous topic was more about location and the timeline, like where is it going to go. This next one is more of the what, or the objects. The game music themes. Music can be attached to really person, place, or thing in the game. What beyond just, okay, here's a cutscene, okay, here's a level, here is a piece of action. What else can we tie our music to that gives us lots of different more options and more things to consider in our soundtrack? Before I do this, let me take another quick pause. Okay. Main theme. The main theme is the main piece of music that gets most attached to a game project, or the general public piece of music that the general public becomes most attached to or most identifies with the game. And this often comes from the main menu music, right? When you first turn on Halo, you hear those awesome choirs, and you know exactly what game you're about to play. Even if you hear this music separate from the game, it becomes very easily identifiable. The main theme isn't typically intentionally written, meaning that you don't sit down and say, okay, today I'm going to write the main theme. Or it also isn't any sort of linear process where you say, okay, today menu music, main theme menu music when you first start the game. And then tomorrow I'm going to do level 1. Day after that I'm going to do level 2. And then I'm going to go all the way to level 35. It is not so much of a cut and dry linear process. You often are creating music for anything in the game. You are just creating music for the sake of building a library of sounds and assets that are appropriate for that game project. And then as the game gets developed, you start identifying pieces of music that can plug in holes in different parts of your game to say, oh, that would really work well in this level, or that would work really nicely in this battle scene over here, and this is a lot of action, or this is for the romantic scene, or this is for the intro or the ending, or whatever it is. And over time, a main theme can show itself, meaning that it's a piece of music that people go back to often. The client or says, man, I really like the sound of this track. I really get attached to it, and I think that might end up being our main theme. The main theme often establishes what is known as musical constants, which is ideas of instrumentation or theme or melody or production style or something that is established pretty early on in a main theme that gets resurfaced or resurfaces over time over the course of the soundtrack. Maybe it's a particular motif, maybe it's a particular rhythm or melody, or the idea of a particular style or pacing to the game. It's just identifiable aspects to the main theme that shows up in multiple places throughout the soundtrack. Then we have motif directly, leitmotif, which is attaching music to some object in the game. It doesn't have to just progress in a linear format in the time of the game or in the timeline of the game, but it can be attached to anything. Characters can be attached to objects, like, oh, you discovered the secret sword or this magical spell or something, and every time you do this action or solve a puzzle, you hear a particular musical theme or a series of notes or musical idea. Of course, Darth Vader is probably one of the best examples of this in film and television and games, but it really has its history all the way back through stage and theater and up through, and also is used throughout modern technology of games. So character themes are very common, often tell you that this is a good guy or a bad guy, or that there's bad guys around the corner, something's about to happen. Or they can twist it on you where you think it is a good guy, and then all of a sudden the music turns all bad and evil, and you, oh no, really, he's turns evil, and you gotta fight and battle them, or something like that. So attaching it to characters in the game. Classic approach of character themes. Level themes. If your game is broken out into levels or is broken into certain areas that the player enters, that particular level or part of the game might have a piece of music attached to it. Fighting games do this really well. Mortal Kombat's a classic example of this, where you only heard that piece of music in that level, and you only fought that character in their kind of home world or level, and so it was always attached to that piece of music. Super Mario Brothers is really good at this, right? I think I've read that there's only 3 minutes of music entirely through all of the original Super Mario Brothers, and they have very distinct sections. The overworld theme when you're on top on the normal ground. There's the underworld theme or underground theme. There's Bowser's Castle. There's the underwater theme. And you might be able to hum those, or they're kind of still in your brain somewhere. And they are attached to that particular part of the game, that level. So it can be determined by location, by character, by object, by concept or idea, the idea of winning or losing, or the idea of losing health or losing a life, or high score, or any sort of different. You can not only identify locations in the game, but objects, characters, and start realizing how much music and where it all needs to go in the game. And a lot of that is just kind of getting you away from the blank slate. If you can just start writing down as much of that stuff as possible and starting to define what it's going to be, even if you don't stick to it. Just it's kind of like dumping your brain out onto a piece of paper or into a DAW just to get things started, and that will reveal even more stuff overall. All right, so for our last topic this evening, we're going to do a trip down memory lane. We're going to talk about a lot of different classic consoles and some that are not so classic, all the way up to the current PlayStation 4 and Xbox One and Nintendo Wii U. But to give us a sense of what was possible throughout the different decades and generations of consoles, we're going to talk about the audio capabilities, starting with the original Nintendo, go through Super Nintendo and GameCube up to the Wii and Wii U. We'll do PlayStation, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and PlayStation 4, Xbox, Xbox 360, and Xbox One, and talk generally about what they were capable of doing and what the new technology was, to really give us a sense of where we are at today with all of the technology, because there were a lot more restrictions, and the capabilities of what's possible now is just exponentially more than every single, even all the previous generations of consoles. And where does that leave us now? And also this relates to mobile devices, because mobile games are generally about 10 years behind in technology and capability and power on the device. And so a lot of the concepts from some of these earlier systems still are found in some of mobile devices today. So I'm going to take a quick pause here, but as we go through all of this, throw out classic games. Did anybody own a Nintendo or Super Nintendo? What games did you have? What favorite games did you play? Soundtracks, any of that stuff. As we go through all the different generations, Nintendo, Genesis, Dreamcast, we'll talk about all of them. So, who had a Nintendo? I think most people at some point probably played a Nintendo, or had that person in the neighborhood that had a Nintendo. I always went over their house and played. Hold on, I'll be right back in just a sec. Going back to the original Atari. Excellent. Yeah, we could have gone. I made the decision. We could have gone back to Atari and ColecoVision and Intellivision, which were the generation before all of this. But Nintendo really was the last of that era, in where everything was being generated by oscillators and waveform generators in real time. So Atari and Nintendo had only a few channels of monophonic synthesized tones of think about all of the classic Nintendo soundtracks, right? You had Super Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda, Tetris, Metroid, Mega Man, all sorts of fun stuff. And all of those soundtracks were done with 5 monophonic sound channels. Most of the time it was even 4. And that was a combination of music and sound effects had to be played through those 4 channels. So it was 2 pulse waves, which are square waves that could be have their size or duty cycle adjusted. 1 triangle wave. So the 2 pulse waves were often melody and harmony or 2 melodies. Triangle wave, which was often the bass, and the noise channel, which was just white noise, and it was often for the percussion, hi-hats, snares, and kicks. Well, not so much kicks. Triangle wave could do some kick sounds. The PCM channel was a 1-bit waveform that could be drawn to your own specification and was often used for sound effects. A lot of times it wasn't used because it was difficult to use. And one of the examples for this that I always remember was in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, where Mario was the referee in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. And if ever you knocked somebody down or you got knocked out, then Mario would come out and would count 1, 2, 3. And it wasn't really counting, but it was some sound. And that was the type of stuff that could be done with the PCM channel. So Nintendo was like Christmas 1984, 1985. Super Nintendo is 1989, 1990, and very short order. They was a big change in the technology. They could do 8 channels of 16-bit with 32K voices, which was not really the case. They would have very, very low resolutions, but it could actually be sampled sounds. And it was still had its own synthesizer to play back the music, but they could have even more channels playing. There was also a separate DSP chip, so they could do simple processing, like very simple delays and a low-pass filter. So you started getting more unique sounds still from these limited systems. I read somewhere if you took all of the 1 copy of every single Nintendo game that was made, there was like, of the original system, there was like 200 or 300 of them, and put them all together, it would be, zip them all up, it would be about 250 megabytes, because there was only a couple of K, maybe a megabyte on those cartridges. All right. Any Sega fans out there? Players of the original Genesis? Sonic the Hedgehog, of course, was the classic one there. 32 kilobytes worth of RAM for the audio. This was mainly for the sound effects. So think about all of the sound effects for a level, all of the enemies in Sonic the Hedgehog, the jump sound, the rolling turbo sound, the rings, all of that stuff operated in 32 kilobytes worth of RAM. Was one of the first systems that could do stereo output. Most people didn't use that. Really, it was out of this headphone jack out of the front, and it had very simple panning of the sounds. And then 6 FM voices. The Sega Genesis ended up sounding really great with the music because it was an FM synthesizer that was licensed from Yamaha. And Yamaha, this is in the 80s, Yamaha was doing big things with 80s music with the DX7, Yamaha DX7 synthesizer, which was FM synthesis and very, very popular. And so they licensed some of the technology and got 6 FM voices, which made it sound much more realistic compared to the simple waveforms. Then later on, the Sega Saturn comes out. It was one of the first gaming systems using CD-based technology. So all of a sudden you had the ability to go from a cartridge that maybe was a couple of megabytes to a CD-ROM disc that was 650 megabytes. And so you had some very, currently laughingly bad, very just bad video games, like made of full motion video that was amazing at the time because it looked like realistic, but was not as popular overall. But it's very expensive. 16 channels of a digital mixer, so you could get 16 sounds playing simultaneously. 8 channels of FM synthesis, so it was still using similar synthesizer for the music. Then we get to 1990s with the Nintendo 64 and the Sony PlayStation. I was absolutely amazed when I saw Super Mario Brothers 64, and it was all in 3D, and it was a pretty big leap in technology. Could do up to 100 channels of audio, but you really couldn't do that because it was only 1% of CPU. Each channel took 1% of CPU. So if you wanted 100 channels, it would go up to 100% of the processor, and you didn't have any room for the rest of the game. But you could do pretty high quality, 16-bit 48K, but only 4 megabytes total on the cartridges. So they was really limited overall. But you could do, this was really when MP3s were starting out, so you could load up your own MP3s and play them in the game, in some of the games. And the fun, interesting story here is that Nintendo and Sony were actually working together on the next Nintendo game console. So before the Nintendo 64 comes out, Sony had been doing amazing things at the time, had a lot of success with the CD player. Sony Philips released some of the first commercial CD players and had their own CD-based technology. So Nintendo wanted to license that CD-based technology for their next gaming console. The Sega Saturn had come out with CD discs, and they were going to release something that had both cartridges and also could play CD-based games. So Nintendo hired Sony to build their next gaming console, and they got very far along into the process. And Sony basically had a fully working game console. And then Nintendo, looking through the contract, realized that Sony was going to retain all of the licensing rights to the CD drive, and Nintendo would retain all of the licensing rights to the cartridge. Well, everybody knew that they were going to be making tons of money, and the industry was going to CDs. And Sony would be making money off of their Nintendo console. And so Nintendo broke off that partnership and went off to make their own Nintendo 64. And Sony said, okay, well, we have this PlayStation that's pretty much ours and a full gaming console that's ready to go. So they went off and made the PlayStation. And as we know, the PlayStation really dominated the industry and continues to dominate the industry in the technology. And it's really taken over what Sony is all about, or a large portion of it. Sony was pro audio and home consumer electronics, and certainly they had the film side and the music label side, and the gaming side was a small aspect of it. But a lot of those things have changed and died off in the industry, and it's allowed Sony to really stay very big in the industry, and the PlayStation is a large portion of what Sony does now. Here in the chat, is that why Nintendo had cartridges instead of CDs? Yes, they didn't have their own CD-based technology, and so they had to license it from somebody else. And they didn't like the deal that they got, so they went off and stayed with cartridges at that point. I think it also had to come down with materials and cost, and they could make so much money off of a cartridge versus a CD game, and so they decided to stay with cartridges. But once you get to the PlayStation, then you get games like Tony Hawk, which has a full punk rock soundtrack, or Crazy Taxi, which has the same. And games had fully orchestrated soundtracks that didn't sound like anything else before. It sounded like what you would hear on a CD. PlayStation had, I don't know if you remember, they had black bottom discs. If you had a Sony CD player, you could actually put your game in your CD player, and track 2 through 99 was all of the music for the game. Or you could put Tony Hawk into the PlayStation and take the CD out real quick and put your own music in, and it would play that instead. So it was a new part of a new generation of the audio industry and what was capable. Sega Dreamcast. Dreamcast was a pretty powerful gaming console and had some pretty impressive games. Their sports games were amazing, like Virtua Football, and played the heck out of some Virtua Tennis on that system. And they had some interesting things with the cartridge and the controller, and but it was really not as popular as it needed to be because it got Sega out of the hardware industry, and they went off just to make games. But it still had a dedicated Yamaha synthesizer, 64 channels of audio, 2 megabytes worth of RAM for the audio. You went from like kilobytes worth of RAM up to 2 megabytes, which is a really big deal at the time for the audio industry. And real-time 3D DSP. This is where you start getting to a bit of 3D games. And so you had 3D audio for panning and level. And then along comes the PlayStation 2. PlayStation 2 was dominant in the industry for quite a while. The PlayStation 2 is the longest running gaming system of all time up to this point, because it came out in around 1999, 2000, and they made the last game for PlayStation 2 in 2012. No, sorry, 2014. So it was almost 15 years in the industry, which is an insanely long time in technology. Other game consoles would like to live that long. And some of that is because when you sold your PlayStation 2 back to Best Buy or GameStop or something like that, and they turned around and sold it to all sorts of places in the world that don't have access to the most recent technology, and a lot of those folks love FIFA, and rightfully so. It's the most popular game and sports game in the world, and so they made FIFA 2014 for the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, Xbox 360, and Xbox One. They made it for lots of different systems. Think about all of those classic PlayStation games, and all of the audio existed in only 2 megabytes of RAM at any one time. They could stream off of the DVD, and that was a pretty new technology at the time. It was, a lot of people's DVD players were their gaming systems. And you could do 5.1 surround sound, but only in the movies, not actually in the gameplay. But there was a lot of very, very popular games, and it was really the peak of technology at the time. Then GameCube comes along, and Nintendo finally gets on the CD disc technology train. And but it was those smaller little half-sized CD discs. At this point, Nintendo isn't really known for blistering new technology. Nintendo is really great at making Nintendo games. You know, with every new system, you're going to have an awesome Mario game and Zelda game and Metroid and all these different versions. And it's all about the gameplay overall. And so it really didn't hit with all sorts of new technology, 64 channels, 16-bit, 48K, Dolby Pro Logic surround sound. So this was what surround sound was before like Dolby DTS 5.1 surround. Disc storage was one of the first, it was the first for Nintendo, being on those CD based discs. And but it was a shift overall for Nintendo. Then Microsoft gets into the industry. Microsoft had really been involved in gaming for a very long time with Windows on your PC, But they wanted to take over your living room also, so they create the Microsoft Xbox. And I would say the Xbox was one of the first home entertainment systems where, yes, it played games, but also connected to the internet, and you could watch movies on it. And I guess the PlayStation 2 was kind of like this also. They were released around the same time, but it's really beyond just strictly a gaming console. They turned into so much more. And at this point, between the PlayStation 2, the GameCube, and the Xbox, you've really hit the quality level where it is full resolution audio, 5.1 surround sound. Now, after you hit the quality, then it's on to quantity. How much stuff can we play through these systems simultaneously? So you get to the Nintendo Wii, and again, it's all about the gameplay. They really made popular motion gaming, where now you don't just have a controller where you're hitting a whole bunch of buttons with your thumbs. You're swinging the controller around and interacting with games in a new way. And it allowed your little brother and your grandma all to play all at the same time on these fun games. I think Wii Sports is still the number one selling game out there of all time. And that's kind of cheating because it was released with every single Wii, and the Wii was insanely popular. But it was a very universally accessible type of game and game system that, again, didn't really push the graphics, but was all about fun gameplay. Has an extra speaker in the game controller. This was really a new one for the industry. So you had another place, a different place to play out separate audio. 64 channels of 16-bit 48K audio, so you have a lot of audio channels with high quality audio. Only 88 megabytes of RAM totally in that gaming system. So things were still limited in the amount of stuff that you could push through the game. The Sony PlayStation 3 has been probably one of the more powerful systems for a long time, and kind of still is. A lot of people, PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, still haven't caught on to the point that the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 have. It's just a game of longevity and numbers. But 512 audio channels at 16-bit 48K, so you hit the high resolution. A whole bunch of audio channels, 512. You probably wouldn't want to hear 512 sounds play simultaneously. But if you think about surround sound and you divide that number by 6, then it comes down to a much more manageable number of sounds, and it makes a whole lot more sense for the game. Dolby Digital 5.1, you could do it in the game. You had a total of 512 megabytes of memory. So the Sony PlayStation 3 only had a half gig of memory that was used for the games. And so 10% is a pretty good number, a general number for audio in games. Like you would get 10% of the RAM that's available, so maybe 25 megabytes, 20 to 30 megabytes. PlayStation 3 introduces the Blu-ray disc, so now they go from 4.9 gigabytes on a DVD drive to 50 gigabytes on a Blu-ray drive. So it's a huge amount of space, and PlayStation 3 just allowed for the games to be even bigger than the Xbox. Xbox 360, 256 channels of audio, 16-bit 48K. Pretty similar overall in the specs. They've always kept up with each other quite well. It still only used DVD games, so you had to make a consideration if you're releasing your game on a PlayStation and the Xbox. You kind of had to use the Xbox as the limitation of around 4.9 gigs. So really powerful, and basically you've hit the quality standard, you've hit the quantity standard because you have so many channels available in these games. And in the most current generation, it's more about what can we do with all of this power? What can we do with all of the quality? What can we do with all of the sounds? How interactive can we make it? And how can we make it more immersive overall? So the Nintendo Wii, again, doesn't really push the technology, except for you've got the separate gamepad, which allows for a completely separate mix of the music. So some people can be listening to what's coming out of the TV, and then somebody else who's controlling another part of the game plugs in their headphones and hears a completely separate mix from the same game. So you had multiple mixes playing simultaneously. You have mics and speakers out of this separate device. 6-channel LPCM output. That is, it's 5.1 surround sound, but it's not encoded. It's not Dolby DTS. It's not AC3 or any other surround format like that. It is just straight 6 channels out of the game, and you have to make sure that your home console, home receiver would actually accept that. Only 2 gigabytes worth of RAM. I mean, you went from 88 megabytes to 2 gigabytes, which is a huge change, and that allows for the games to be just that much more complex. 1 gigabyte was dedicated just for running the game console, and another gigabyte was set aside for the game itself. The PlayStation 4, again, really one of the more powerful systems between this and the Xbox One. 50 gigabyte Blu-ray disc, not too much known or released out to the public as to information of what's the internal workings of the audio system, but it is based off of an AMD True Audio chip, meaning that there is a separate processor in the gaming console that's just meant for audio. This takes away a lot of the processing power off of the main chip, and audio tools like Wise can use plugins that run specifically on the PlayStation 4 for things like reverbs and compressors and EQs and filters that doesn't take away from the power of the game. So it allows for some pretty interesting things. You've got the wireless on the game controller. You have a wireless connection to the headphones. And it is really a very, very powerful system. Are these plugins free to download from Wise? No. If you wanted to, you have to be a licensed PlayStation developer to get access to the specific PlayStation ones. There might be other plugins, but I think they need to be licensed too. I don't know that there are free or demo versions of them. Then we have the Microsoft Xbox One, which is similar again to the power of the PlayStation 4. It does use 50 gigabyte Blu-ray discs. It went up from the DVD drives. I am pretty sure that Sony owns the technology of Blu-ray. They invented it, and so I think that Microsoft has to, or they do license the technology for the Blu-ray in the Xbox. That means Sony makes a little bit of money off of every Xbox that is sold also. Which is pretty insane. Dolby DTS 7.1, 8 gigabytes worth of shared memory. So they went from a half a megabyte in the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox to 8 gigabytes in the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. Basically, they went to 16 times the amount of RAM available in these systems, which allows for an amazing amount of new stuff being able to be played through these games. Microsoft has the Kinect. You can actually talk to your game system and have voice commands and controls. I think Sony has done something similar to that also. But just new technology and new ways that they're going to go. A lot of companies are going to VR. Like the Oculus Rift is becoming popular, and 3D audio and spatialized sounds in these VR games are what a lot of the industry is talking about. Whether or not that's going to be caught on by the public, and if people want to actually wear head-mounted displays all the time to play their games, but there's some interesting things that are on the horizon with all of the technology. So always good to keep up with what's happening in the industry. All right, I think that's enough from me for this session. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them up. But I think I'll wrap it up there. And let's see. You have week 2 assignments due Sunday. You have week 1 revisions due Sunday. So lots of things to work on. It gets week 2 and week 3 are kind of at the full pace, and then it kind of slows down into week 4. So Let me know if you have any questions. I'll stick around for a few, but other than that, have a good afternoon and weekend, and I will see you again on Tuesday. Thanks a lot. Oh, I guess, wait, I have a quick one. Question here, or comment. I've seen an omnidirectional treadmill being used in games also. That is, yes, I've seen that, and that's insane. And, I mean, it's not insane. There's technology to do it. But, yeah, now you can walk anywhere in the game, and it really feels like you're walking constantly for miles. And Carmen, if you were to buy a new controller, which one would you pick? What do you mean, game controller or MIDI controller, or what kind of controller? Game controller, I don't know. I just use the default ones, but otherwise, not sure which direction. Oh, an Xbox controller? I don't know. I don't have an Xbox One. But I don't. Are there different controllers? I didn't even know that. Nope. I just play with the standard one. I don't think I put enough wear and tear on it to require a specific one, or I'm not gone pro yet. Oh, not controller. Oh, which one would I buy? PlayStation or Xbox or Wii U? I bought a PlayStation. I think there are cooler indie games. The proprietary games for PlayStation are, I feel, better overall. Xbox One hasn't really had a game that's been incredibly awesome that I have to have that I can't find either on a PC or PlayStation. So, but there are PlayStation games that I can't find anywhere else. And we have a PlayStation teachers group at Full Sail. So I don't know if you had Dave Kropf, or you had Danny McIntyre last month. You had Steve Cox in the previous month, and you'll have Michael Scicciano soon, next month maybe. Yeah, and a couple of other of us all have our PlayStation teachers group where we go off and cause all sorts of havoc. So lots of fun. All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. Have a good one.